Carson Wentz is in, Sam Howell and Brett Rypien are out. Max Brosmer makes the team, and that's just the start of Cut Down Day news. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I have a whole bunch of stuff to go through today, so we are going to go very fast, but the first thing we got to do is talk about all of the news, and then there's going to be a mailbag later in the day, but the news, of course, is that the Vikings have made some switches at the quarterback position. Their quarterback room is now J.J. McCarthy, Max Brosmer, and Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz was a name floated back in like March. He never joined a team, so he now joins the Vikings for the lowest you can possibly pay him. I actually think the money between him and Sam Howell works out to exactly a wash because of like veteran credits and stuff you don't need to worry about. But as a corresponding thing, they've released Brett Rypien, which was expected after that third preseason game. Max Brosmer pretty handily outplayed him in what was very clearly a winner go, a mano-a-mano, one man and two men enter, one man leaves kind of situation. But they also traded Sam Howell to the Philadelphia Eagles. The fact that this comes with Carson Wentz, like corresponding, is kind of funny and ironic because of the last time quarterbacks got traded between the Vikings and Eagles and how much it also had to do with Carson Wentz. But I digress. The Sam Howell trade nets the Vikings a 5-6 swap and a 7th next year. So they're on the good end of the 5-6 swap and a 7th next year. Or 7th in 2027, not next year. So if you're keeping track at home, the Vikings got Sam Howell in the draft for a 5-5 swap. They swapped a 5th for a different 5th that was like 30 spots lower and got Sam Howell for it. And when they traded Sam Howell to the Eagles, they managed to take an entire 6th and turn it into the Eagles' 5th. Interesting little fairy dust moment where you can make a little extra value out of nothing for a player that played pretty poorly in camp and, played poorly in one of his 2 preseason games and ultimately didn't get the QB2 job. I wonder how long the Vikings had Carson Wentz in their minds, but also if they did not bring, he was sitting on the couch. He could have been there for camp, right? Even if you had 5 QBs for camp. I mean, shoot, the Browns had 6. Like, that's not crazy. And he could have been, spending camp with the Vikings, with the receivers, getting chemistry and becoming a better backup. But as it is, they probably thought that Howell was a preferable option to Wentz and that Wentz would be like a backup if Howell crashes out. Well, Howell totally flames, crashes, burns. And so they go with this. Some other news happened. We'll get into some cuts. And then I was just kind of trying to think through Carson Wentz as a backup quarterback. This is the only place you're going to get serious Carson Wentz analysis from me because it's Football Party or on the squad show where Arif is. I'm not there. I'm going to have bad intentions, but thinking through him and the way that his career has gone as a backup quarterback is interesting. And it's what he's done for the last 2 years. So it's not like we're, taking some big grand experiment, but I think it's worth talking out and sort of recounting Carson Wentz's NFL career and how it came to the point that it is right now from being, a 2017 MVP favorite and Super Bowl winner. And even in the couple years after that, being seen as one of the upper echelon QBs in the league and then flaming out as hard as he did. Boy, it's fascinating. And I think it's worth going back over through the lens of how does that make you as a backup? So real quick before I get into that, and then we'll do questions and hot takes afterwards from the mailbag. We're doing an early mailbag because I've got a 53-man roster projection coming out tomorrow. But there is some other news. The Vikings have begun their process of camp cutdowns. For full transparency with my 53-man roster projection, because this is the one I try to get as right as possible, I've already done it. I have it done. I will tell you what it is tomorrow, but I have it done. So if I end up being wrong about something, I will be honest about that. I guess I'm a podcaster. How much do you trust me? But I'll tell you, here's who I had, and I was wrong about it. But other Vikings that have been waived are Travis Bell, Robert Lewis, Silas Bolden. Not a huge surprise in any of these, but Silas Bolden was one that was in a lot of people's pre-camp 53-man rosters and stuff. I think I might have even had him in one at some point. Nope, never did. Ben Solak rule. But I mean, he had a terrible preseason, so it kind of makes sense. These early ones are definitely still practice squad candidates, depending on, I mean, a lot of that is you're kind of coasting on like draft profile and athleticism and stuff and saying, well, maybe with a year you can get better at all the stuff that got you cut. Zach Bailey, who just joined the team real quick for that last game. He was a tackle. Logan Brown, another exciting undrafted free agent that did not pan out, but I do see him on the practice squad for exactly that reason. He was pretty highly regarded. I think it was the best undrafted rookie on the consensus board of this class for the Vikings. Mish Powell, Trey Stewart, Keenan Garber, and Reddy Stewart. Reddy Stewart was maybe the only one that I thought maybe had snuck an outside chance to make the team. It's because Matt Freese floated that idea, and it kind of made sense to me that he played pretty well in a game where both Dwight McGlothern and Zemiah Vaughn did not. And like, oh, maybe there's some movement happened, but I guess not. And then also Cam Gill was released, which is a different thing because he's a vested veteran, so it's a different word. It works different. Same with Brett Rypien. So the QB room now is J.J. McCarthy, Carson Wentz, and Max Brosmer. In case anybody is not a Vikings fan or is totally unplugged from J.J. McCarthy, I've been getting these questions a lot. Maybe you guys do too if you're like super diehard Vikings fans, of people asking, hey, what does this Carson Wentz news mean about J.J. McCarthy? So it maybe will sound abundantly obvious to all of you, but just in case, let me put it on record that there is no expectation that Carson Wentz would ever compete with J.J. McCarthy. There's no understanding of there's going to be a short leash because we're going to think about putting this guy in. There is no idea whatsoever of Carson Wentz being any kind of potential starter. Not that I know of right now. Maybe the beat reporters can tell us when they're not arguing with Thor Nystrom on Twitter. But the understanding that at least that I have is that he is a backup and he was brought in a way that he otherwise wouldn't have if Sam Howell played better. This is a Sam Howell replacement. And the guys that Carson Wentz has backed up in the last 2 years are Matt Stafford and Pat Mahomes. And I think J.J. McCarthy has just about as much job security. They're going to go with him kind of come hell or high water and, let him work through whatever young flaws he has. But they're also very excited about him. And they're not. This is not a Daniel Jones joins and Anthony Richardson is on notice kind of situation. One more thing. So updates on the Adam Thielen stuff and wide receiver. So the Vikings trading for a wide receiver, every reporter is still very much insisting, whether they are national or local, that the Vikings are going to get something done. And Adam Thielen is a name on that list, but he's only one of many. So there's nobody is guaranteeing that it definitely is Adam Thielen. But Access Vikings came out this morning with an episode that spoke about it a little bit, and I thought dropped some interesting nuggets. That one is that Adam Thielen is very open and excited about the idea, that he wasn't very happy about leaving Minnesota, and it was more that Minnesota just didn't want him back, and he was kind of bummed to leave. So now the ability to come back, he would be excited about. And that the impasse, I guess, between the Vikings and Panthers is something about compensation. Some report the Strib team argues that it's about draft pick compensation. I've seen other conflicting reports that it's about money, but it's something in they haven't come to a deal that both sides like yet, and maybe they won't. However, Ben Gessling on that show implied that the turning a sixth into a fifth compensation from the Sam Howell trade is like potentially an important change in circumstances to get a wide receiver deal done. So by the time you listen to this, there might be a wide receiver deal. We will talk about it tomorrow if we have to, maybe even do an emergency podcast if it's a big enough transaction. Otherwise, I'll just fold it into the 53-man roster. But something worth mentioning that the wide receiver thing is still very much in there. But what I want to transition to now is discussing Carson Wentz as a backup quarterback and what we know about him Is this the guy that's best for our young quarterback and his development? Maybe he's perfect. Let me explain. Next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Rugiet. Fellas, you've heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pills, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast. On average, 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, and you can stay confident in control when the moment is right. So if you've tried all the traditional options and they haven't worked, maybe you are one of over 150,000 men that can make the switch to Rugiet. And it's completely online. They connect you with a board-certified doctor and ship your treatment discreetly to your door. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. It is almost FanDuel Futures Day. In fact, tomorrow is FanDuel Futures Day, August 26th. And on FanDuel Futures Day, for just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. Whether you're calling MVP, a long shot division winner, or you're even ready to crown the Super Bowl champion before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. And there's all kinds of Vikings-specific futures and otherwise. It's, I think, plus 350 last I looked for 3 NFC North teams to make the playoffs. That's a futures bet. J.J. McCarthy to get more than 35, 75 and a half passing yards. That's a futures bet. Or the Vikings over or under 8.5 or 9.5 wins. Actually, any win total is a futures bet on FanDuel. So pick your win total, and if you want to get more aggressive and say Vikings over 11.5 wins, they're going to be the best team, you can get really, really long odds on that and maybe get a great payout if you win. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Moving on with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Real quick, I would like to ask you to complete the survey in the show notes. We're trying to get a little bit more information about what ads people are interested in seeing. So go take a look at that if you can. And as for Carson Wentz's career trajectory, it's weird, right? His first 2 years looked like he was going to be the next big thing. Maybe you could sense, it was fraudulent or, Doug Peterson merchant or whatever. But all of those coaches that he was supposed to be a quote unquote merchant of are Doug Peterson, Frank Reich, and John DeFilippo. These guys did not end up bearing out. And Wentz, really, the way it worked early in his career, I'm talking, 2017, that MVP season, it was a lot of run around, improvise, scramble, right? And then after he gets hurt, right? He gets hurt in 2017, tears his ACL. When he comes back, he doesn't have the same ability that he had before. And he has to play a different game, but he doesn't play that different game. He just starts heaving up YOLO balls and throwing a bunch of interceptions, and it leads to this torpedoing of his career. It's not crazy to imagine that a guy was just a flash in the pan, right? And then maybe they got a little more tape on him, defenses did, and he got easier to play against, and therefore he didn't work out. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention all of the stories that came out over his time in Philadelphia, and then after that, Indianapolis and Washington, about how he was as a teammate and his behavior during those times. There's a great video, it's about 25 minutes long, from a YouTube channel called She Got Sports. I'm going to link it in the show notes, that I think does a great job of telling this story. But basically the whole time that Carson Wentz is going back and forth between struggling and, having some bad games, but then also having some really, truly brilliant moments, in particular in the 2019 season when the Eagles win the division again and end up going to the playoffs. But among that whole time, players mostly, and Eagles people, I guess, people within the organ and journalists that cover the Eagles are reporting via anonymous quotes from these players. These players are like giving quotes, but just anonymously, that are like, this guy's egotistical. Nobody likes playing with him. He doesn't take coaching. He doesn't take criticism. He plays favorites. He thinks he's God's gift to the team. He thinks he's the king of everything. And nobody likes to play with him. You have to remember the like context of Nick Foles in this situation, right? When Nick Foles comes in 2017, wins the Super Bowl, and then in 2018, Carson Wentz gets hurt again before the playoffs. He gets a back injury, and he's out for the season. And then when Nick Foles comes into the 2018 playoffs, they win the double doink. So here's Nick Foles winning playoff games again and getting all the glory. You know, if you're an Eagles player, you're going, man, yeah, this guy is the one that led us through the Super Bowl, that is leading us through the playoffs again. He's the one with a statue outside. You know, he's the one that got the Super Bowl MVP. He's the one with the jersey in the Hall of Fame. He's the one that did the Philly call. He's the one that goes down in the lore and legend of the Philadelphia Eagles. Carson Wentz was just also there. And 20 years from now, 40 years from now, Eagles fans will remember Nick Foles' name. They will not remember Carson Wentz's nearly as much. And I gotta think that weighs on you. I'm purely speculating here. I don't know where Carson Wentz's head was at during all of this, but you gotta think that that's upsetting. And I believe there were some reports that like he didn't take very well to some of the criticisms that came to him. But Philadelphia at no point benched Carson Wentz for Nick Foles. They did bench him for Jalen Hurts. And so you think about like this moment in time in 2020, right? We don't know about what Jalen Hurts will be yet. He is a second round QB. He's seen as kind of raw, maybe good, maybe not. Bama might have kind of carried him a little bit. He is not a blue chip player. I think if you could redo the 2020 draft, he'd go a lot higher. But at the time, you're thinking that maybe Philadelphia just got a backup, or maybe they're trying to push him. But they just won the division with Carson Wentz, and he looked pretty good in 2019. So it was kind of unfathomable that they were just going to like move on from him next year. But that's exactly what happened. Carson Wentz struggled in 2020. He gets benched. Jalen Hurts finishes that year. Everyone gets fired. That's their 4-11 season. And everyone is like moves on, right? And Nick Sirianni joins the Eagles. They trade Carson Wentz off to the Indianapolis Colts, where the same thing happens. He struggles up and down. He plays some good games, some not so good games. They end the season on a sour note. They lose to the Urban Meyer Jacksonville Jaguars in the last game of the season. That was a win in for them. And Carson Wentz ends up getting unceremoniously traded again. And then a bunch of stories come out from the Colts about how the guy's hard to work with, and that he's selfish, and that he's got a big ego, and that he doesn't take to coaching. And the nature in which he struggles is the same. He throws interceptions. He makes stupid plays. He has all the ability in the world, but he doesn't learn how to be a responsible quarterback. He thinks he can still hero ball everything. Hero ball is the word that gets thrown around here. So in Washington, a lot of the same stuff happens. He gets hurt. Taylor Heineke plays. And then again, you've got a team kind of rallying around his backup. And when he goes back in for the last couple games of, win or go home regular season play, he falls apart and they lose and they don't make the playoffs. It's all the same thing. He rubs his teammates the wrong way. He rubs his coaches the wrong way. And he can't stop making dumb turnovers. Now, the dumb turnover thing, that's what the Vikings have had as their backup quarterback for a while, right? You almost want a high variance backup. Yeah, you've got a lot of ability and it's high risk, but we'll take a risky guy versus, a Sean Mannion that can't push the ball at all, and your offense will be properly executed and punt 3 and out every time, versus somebody that is like Nick Mullins that might move the ball way downfield, make a really cool play, score a bunch of touchdowns, also throw 4 interceptions, and you might have to overcome that to win, but there's a path you can see. There's explosiveness, there's something. So that kind of makes sense, but it's this like Kevin O'Connell has always valued good teammate more than I think other coaches. I don't think like Mike Zimmer valued that much. You could be a dick in Mike Zimmer's team. As long as you weren't like a dick like to him. You could be a jerk, but if you can score touchdowns, like whatever, right? If Hitler ran a 4-4, if Hannibal ran a 4-4, Hannibal Lecter ran a 4-4, we'd say he had an eating disorder, right? Like you can do that, but Kevin O'Connell has been, I think, very meticulous in the kinds of people that he decides to get into bed with or not. I think that has mattered in the draft. I think that they've been more reticent to pick certain players that they don't believe fit their culture. And Mr. doesn't take coaching and all his teammates hate him does not fit this culture. So I wonder how much things have changed in the last couple of years, because Carson Wentz has been out of the limelight for 2 years. Carson Wentz's career died. Like, you can be a guy that nobody likes to play with, but if you're good, everyone will put up with it. And the problem was that Carson Wentz was also bad, kind of for those same reasons. When coaches would tell him stop playing hero ball, he wouldn't listen. He would say, you don't know how I play football. I'm going to play it my way. And he would stubbornly make the same mistakes over and over and over again. But you get traded unceremoniously twice, you get cut from teams, and then you can't get a job in 2023 until the Rams call you to be a backup. I wonder if that's a little humbling. And I wonder, you get a little older, you get a little wiser, right? Everybody gets to be young and headstrong. And then eventually you get to a point somewhere in your 20s where you realize how you want to be, who you want to be. And you get a sense of clarity, I guess, when you get benched and cut. Like, I have to imagine that gives you makes you look in the mirror a little bit. And he was a backup in Los Angeles, learned that scheme, so that's helpful. Then he was a backup last year in Kansas City, but just a backup. No competition. No, if this guy plays bad, we're putting you in. Nothing like that. And the situation is the same here as well. He's a backup. So I wonder how the last couple years, I wonder how he's done. And I would imagine the Vikings have done some kind of investigation into this exact question. I have to imagine somewhere in the Vikings they had this question too. But I think about it as this. One of the Eagles players in one of their anonymous quotes talked about how Carson Wentz had been the golden boy his whole life. He had a lot of people kissing up to him, and how that sort of crafted his personality as like viewing himself as a prince, and pun intended. And he had that kind of golden boy thing in the same way J.J. McCarthy did. J.J. McCarthy has been anointed to be a QB for his whole life. I wrote a big, long article about it on Wide Left that I'm really, really proud of. Please go read it. It's called The Unbearable Lightness of Quarterbacking. But McCarthy has very much had trainers around him. I mean, he had a personal trainer when he was in 5th grade. He's had, his dad fawning over him at all times. He's had high school coaches were looking at him in middle school. College coaches were looking at him in high school. NFL coaches were looking at him, in 2 years before the draft. So he's always had this around him. And I wonder if it's not a little perfect. I'm totally speculating here. And I don't think this had anything to do with the move. I think the move was just Sam Howell's bad. We need a better replacement. But I wonder if just the way that personalities converge in an NFL room is so interesting to me, and the way that stories converge. The story of Carson Wentz is a cautionary tale for the story of J.J. McCarthy. If J.J. McCarthy doesn't learn from his mistakes, he will become Carson Wentz, because that's what Carson Wentz didn't do. He didn't learn from his mistakes. And now, next to him, all that time is going to be the guy that shows you what happens to your career if you don't learn from your mistakes. That's so fascinating to me. I don't think that that's what they did on purpose at all. I don't think that's like the architecture of psychological manipulation. I just think it's an interesting juxtaposition between a guy who is a golden boy and let it get to his head versus a guy who is a golden boy and hasn't had the opportunity to yet and needs to resist it if it comes up. Your questions and hot takes are next on Locked On Vikings. This episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner, and boy, you can feel the energy. The leaves, maybe they're starting to turn where you are. Maybe you're starting to feel the temperature drop or get really, really hot because, I don't know, winter is later now. I don't want to think too much about it. This year, I'm playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran creating your millionth league. It's loaded with all kinds of fun ways to play, from the classics to all sorts of new tertiary modes. With the season kickoff on September 4th, now is the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football, which offers so many fun ways to compete. Try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. If you want to play instantly with friends, you can try the new Draft with Friends mode, or if you prefer the classics, you can get your crew together and go head to head in a private league. And if you don't have a crew, that's no problem. Join a public league. That's the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Moving on to your questions here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. This is where you can send me questions. So if you have questions or if you want to confess hot takes anonymously, I will respond to them on the show and protect your anonymity. You can submit them at the Google form in the show notes. The first question comes from Tosin, who asks, how do we help Arif cope with the QB signing? I will not be helping Arif cope with it. I hope everybody understands that I do not intend to be helpful to Arif during this trying time. Bears fans are obsessed with Luke, and it's kinky. Says, last week on the show, there were a bunch of Bears fans who were pretty big for their britches after a good Chicago preseason game. Haven't heard from Bears fans since the last preseason game. Since the last show, there was one other Bears fan that put in right after the show aired, like on that Tuesday, there was an entry from a Bears fan that was like, are you biased against Caleb Williams because you're scared of him succeeding or whatever? The answer to that is no. And weirdly, I haven't heard from Bears fans since the last preseason game. I wonder if things looked a little different that time. I wonder if maybe they only show up when they feel like they can brag about their favorite team and they actually aren't serious at all. Anyways, this person asks, caller is under the impression that Thielen is coming back. And while I love Adam, my favorite Viking of the last 15 years, this doesn't make sense. Why not get some team's wide receiver 3 that's been there for 3 years that might fit the gadget player role we need, like Josh Downs, Xavier Hutchinson, etc. I could be way off on the value we'd have to give up. We did just get an extra 5th. I don't think you're that far off. And I think that it is absolutely, those things are also being considered. But it's a value proposition, right? If you could get, for a 6th, you could get Xavier Hutchinson. For a 5th, you could get Adam Thielen. Like, it's not that much more expensive to get an Adam Thielen. And I think Adam Thielen is very much still playing good ball. I always predicted that his game would age gracefully because it's nuanced. I think the same about like Justin Jefferson. I think Justin Jefferson's game doesn't rely on a particular kind of athleticism in the way, like, I don't think Jordan Addison's game ages as gracefully because it requires a lot of speed for him to do what he does. I think Thielen and Jefferson play a more technical game, and therefore they will age gracefully. And lo and behold, Thielen very much has. I think it would be awesome if he ended up back in Minnesota. My contention has always been it's really hard to envision how that deal gets done, and it is very much proving to be difficult to get that deal done. Seth asks, the final 53 isn't known at the time of question, but I'm assuming a healthy amount of players will make this roster that were undrafted free agents or of a similar variety. Would it be bad faith to applaud the Vikings for identifying this talent, considering the bottom 10 to 12 of our roster seems particularly weak? Yeah, it's like really weak. It's not the bottom 10, like the bottom like 5. Like every time I do a 53-man roster, even going back to before I was podcasting, like back in the purple PTSD days, or even like on Reddit, before I was doing anything in an even semi-professional capacity. You always, like, the decisions at the end of the roster are either, wow, there's all these guys and I don't want to cut one, or there's, oh my God, how do I find the next guy? And I feel like the former is a little more common than the latter. This is the one I think I could reasonably say 4 different roster spots are wide open for waiver claims. From a tight end, a receiver, a corner, maybe 2. I would have said quarterback before Carson Wentz happened. Like, the roster at the bottom is very, very, very weak, opening the door for undrafted rookies. But there's a difference, right? There's a difference between a guy like Zamiah Vaughn, who had a horrible 3rd preseason game, making it in a context where in a normal roster he wouldn't have. There's a difference between that and Ivan Pace, right? Making the roster because he deserved to. Or the one I always think of is Eric Wilson, who's now also on the roster. But Eric Wilson made that team because he deserved to make that team. And, you know, I think he knocked off, well, I think the draft pick that was supposed to have that spot was hurt, and you do need a little bit of luck, but like there's a big difference there. And I think it's sort of a small criticism, but I think it's one worth levying that, like, yeah, like players 45 to 53 aren't really rosterable. They're not just backup quality. They're like bad for backups, and that's potentially a concern if those depths actually have to get drawn on. But it also tempers the, ooh, we're so good at finding undrafted free agents. Well, yeah, you'll roster all your free agents if the rest of your roster is terrible. But I think you have to go case by case. Like Elijah Williams should be on a team. He's played well enough. He has played rosterable football. He should make the team. And I think the same thing about like Redmond, Taimani, and all those guys. They did do a good job finding those guys. I don't necessarily feel the same way about like Ben Urasek, who might make it by default. The answer to life, the universe, and everything, Andrew De Paola, true. He does wear 42. Asks, is Anthony Richardson now the incoming class of 26 to the Kevin O'Connell Center for QBs who can't throw good and want to learn to do other stuff good too? Maybe. I could see it. Kwesi loves a draft bust, and they did love him coming out of the draft. I think the, well, Shane Steichen ruined you argument is a pretty easy sell for a guy that's going to be, he could be like 25 and still dripping with talent. Yeah, I'm sure you'd want to maybe take a look there. But I could see a team that like wants to actually have him compete for the start, paying him more in like a hypothetical free agency or paying more for him in a trade market. So I don't know if it's going to happen, but I do feel like Anthony Richardson ends up in purple sometime or another. Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, asks, I know everyone is all about wide receiver depth, but what ideas could there be for tight end 3? Would love to poach Nick Muse back somehow. Yeah, Nick Muse is actually, I think, a pretty good idea. I'm sure there are other waiver claims and stuff out there. I'm not gonna you're gonna have to ask a fantasy like a dynasty deep league person that's got like 18 tight ends on their bench that knows everything, has all the rosters memorized. But I do think that a waiver claim is in the cards there. I don't think it's guaranteed. I think they could just roll with Urasek and wait for Gavin Bartholomew to get healthy, but we'll see. Ben asks, when are you going to take the deserved victory lap for correctly scouting Jaden Daniels and Chop Robinson? I can't do the Chop one yet. I saw the good preseason play. He had like an unblocked sack that doesn't do anything for me, but he's been fine. I think I said he would be better though. I said he would be like the star of the class, and he's been good enough. But I probably went a little hard there. But yeah, in terms of Jaden Daniels, I took it last year. That I already took that lap. He was QB1 for me. Jaden Daniels was, and that actually bore out. Only 2 hot takes for this one, but I'm sure we'll see more later. The first one comes from Areef's favorite NDSU Bison. He says, Carson Wentz is a top 5 backup quarterback in the NFL. Legit great starting experience with MVP caliber play, arm talent, and can run the ball well. His flaws are bad, but put him solely in the backup quarterback category, and the ability to get high level play from him is much more likely than most in his position. There must always be like a YOLO idiot in Minnesota. It feels like we just like throw in, he's just another Nick Mullins, right? A guy that's got talent, that can put the ball where he means to, that's got an arm, and is just going to do dumb stuff with the ball sometimes. It's too much to ever be a starter, but hey, shoot, if he's got to come in and you're down 2 scores and it's the 4th quarter, maybe that's exactly the kind of weird thing that you need. High variance backups, I think, is like a low variance backup is Sean Mannion. You definitely will look okay and lose. A high variance backup is you might have a disaster here, but he also might get hot and actually win the game for you. I think you kind of want the latter. Last one comes from Procrastinating Grad Student's Professor, who says, procrastinating grad student will not get his work done and will have to repeat his class again. Also, I love Adam Thielen. My fantasy team has been hooked on a Thielen since 2016, but he is not the fix for what we need. Too old, and we need a Rondale Moore replacement. I don't think this is a very hot take. I think the Carson Wentz take was much hotter. But I do kind of agree. You need a punt return. They need a punt return. A punt return is a wide open job. So I don't know and I also don't know if you do trade for Adam Thielen, if that's the only receiver move you make. Because I don't know if Lucky Jackson is even guaranteed to make this team anymore. And Addison is not going to count for the first week. So for the first 3 weeks. So I could see multiple transactions at receiver, to be honest. I will talk to you all tomorrow. We'll go over any wide receiver stuff that happens and a 53-man roster. So that'll all be very fun. And then we'll cover more transactional news as it happens. Things tend to be more piecemeal than they used to be around cut down day, because there's a lot of like reasons to keep a guy on the roster for one day or to cut a veteran and then re-sign the veteran. like facilitate somebody who's got to be on the roster for a day because of IR or whatever. So there's like some weird stuff to track. So we will have a lot to talk about all week. I hope you join me on the Locked On Vikings podcast. And as always, Skull.